Okay, Kira, welcome back. And I'm really glad that we're going to continue this conversation. And I think that, as we just discussed, one of the things we should probably do is to give you an opportunity to speak about what it is that you're doing with Informed, to let people know about your thinking on how to handle the onslaught of information that we're being deluged with on a daily basis, and just in general give us a sense of what you're up to.
Totally. Thank you, Noah, for inviting me back on and continuing this important conversation around really it's sort of two things, and they're part of the same, like two faces of the same coin. One is information overload that is so just everywhere in our society, and the second is, and they go hand in hand, is misinformation. Which, when I think of misinformation, it's accelerated by information overload, and it's enabled by information overload. And misinformation is rampant in our society. It always has been. I think it only continues to increase. And so, in realization of the sort of status quo of right now, the everyday person, it's hard for them to access information in a way that is reliable, that is credible, that is trustworthy. It's very difficult. And I think people don't give it enough thought as to actually how hard it is to get the facts, get the information without being subject to somebody's bias in the process, and without being subject to someone else's solicitations in the process, which is part of the whole overload concept of it's very difficult to just get the information without seeing tons of advertisements and without seeing someone's perspective being kind of imposed on you in the process. And so that's the spirit in which we started to build. And we found that there was resonance with a solution that does less instead of doing more. And so instead of being a solution that does everything from news aggregation to news analysis, summarization, editorial, opinion, kind of these big ecosystems that are already in place in a society through everyone from the New York Times to Reuters to etc. Most people weren't reading the news at all. As we do research across our customer segments, but also just across the population, we find that most people actually have no idea what the news are. They get them secondhand, they get them third hand, because reading the news itself is an extremely exhausting process, an extremely inefficient process. So there was a real appetite for doing less instead of doing more.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know that like one of the platforms that's attempting to deal with some of the same issues is something like Ground News, where they're an aggregator that tries to balance out various perspectives on certain topics. And so they kind of offer a categorization of what might be considered, either left-leaning or right-leaning perspectives. And it's exhausting to go through the process of, using that platform because basically you're reading several articles instead of one. And you're left with the same problem, which is, okay, well, particularly for people who are relatively new to thinking about some of these subjects, how do you assess the quality of the information that you're being presented?
I think 100%. I think Ground News is a great platform for the news junkies and for the people that love to read all these different perspectives and love to do this sort of investigative journalism of their own, of where their opinion is. You read the red news, you read the blue news, and you try to find your purple in the middle. But it's an extremely exhausting process because it turns out you're reading now 2 to 3 to 4 times the articles per issue. So instead of reading just one article on an issue, which you can't really do in a society anymore because everything is so bias imposing. With Ground News, you're now able to more efficiently do what I guess some people have always done, is read more articles on the same issue. And it's just so exhausting, right? It's even with all the tools they have in place and the summarizations, it's exhausting to, have to decipher where your position is, where you are in this kind of spectrum of policy thought, and it just sucks. It just sucks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's a great try. I support the effort, but I can't really use it because it is exhausting. Although, it's interesting, the idea of trying to find where you are within the spectrum is sort of a strange idea in a certain sense. Like, at least to me, like, I don't really think that spectrum is real. Yeah, I think that fundamentally we're presented with information, some of which is verifiable to some extent, none of which has an inherent uh, red, blue, purple paint on it, right? It's like the actual facts of the matter, if you can discern what they are, they don't have a political perspective, right? So, from my point of view, ideally, this is just an ideal, but I don't think it's practical. But ideally, that's the way we read when we're trying to understand the information we're presented with, most of which is painted with one color or another. There's not a lot of clear paint.
I love that you mentioned this because I think that's exactly what we're trying to do with Informed is present what we think of as uncolored news, right? When we think of color, we think of the red and blue colors, and the purple being sort of the kind of maybe the centerism in the middle. But what we're seeing is that, like, to get to your purple, wherever it may be on this whole spectrum, you need to read all these other perspectives first. That's the way the current industry runs. It gives you perspectives, and you have to find kind of where you stand. And our whole philosophy, aligned with what you just said, is could we actually just present the base facts, the kind of fact base that is like the mother fact base behind these issues? And the funny thing is, the journalists actually have those tools, and so they do exist. There's companies like AFD that actually provide sort of reporting for journalists that are hidden behind the scenes. They're not shown to consumers, and there are kind of, so to speak, sources for just factual information, factual reporting. They just don't really trickle down to the end user. They go through this metamorphosis of adding commentary, adding opinion, adding bias, and then most of what the consumers are sort of reading is now the same fact base that was once given to the journalist community, now taken apart into the CNN world, taken into the NBC world, taking into Fox News,
Yeah.
into all these different branches.
So in a way, what we could say is basically what they're doing is they're slapping some paint on it. They're putting blue or red paint on it. Maybe there's someone putting a little green paint on here and there. I mean, so one of the things that I've noticed is that the longer an article is, the more paint there is on it, if we're going to continue to use that metaphor. So there's something about having an incredibly pithy summary of just what do we know, what actually occurred, that seems to be the best way of getting back to that. What did you call it? Like kind of the base facts, the master set of facts?
We call the common fact base.
Common fact base.
Yeah. And it's also worth distinguishing, like, what's in the common fact base.
I was just gonna go there. Yeah.
Perfect. And it's all about things you don't say instead of the things you do, because there's no shortage of information out there. We as a society used to live in a place where you have to go to the archive, go to the library, and search for something. You have to identify information. It was difficult. We now live in the very opposite world, where you can have a half-baked question, and the search engine will both complete your question and give you a load, thousands, tens of thousands of answers to that question that you didn't even know you had. You didn't even know you had that sort of formulations of the question. So I think the beauty with what we're doing, I'll dare say call it beauty, is that we don't, step ahead into providing the analysis and the editorial and the interpretation. Leave that to the reader. And what we do is we focus on this common fact base. What's in this common fact base obviously varies, but it aligns to the same framework that we use, which is what, where, when, and what's the context. And generally, that is the core of the issue that at least our target users who are not interested in commentary, who are not interested in bias, are looking for, right? Is no, I believe you're subscribed to Informed, and I think you've seen our work. It's super minimalist, and it stops right at providing any sort of interpretation. Because the way we think about our value is we help you with the building blocks of your opinion, but you get to form your opinion yourself.
Right.
Versus with other articles, other sources, you are presented with an opinion, sometimes also some facts, but they're all in support of that opinion. And then you have to decide, okay, well, do I buy it or do I not buy it? I have to go somewhere else. You go somewhere else and you get presented with the same thing. You get told an opinion with some selective evidence, and then you have to decide, okay, do I buy this one or not yet? And as you go through that sort of ground news process, you eventually figure out what it is that you believe. But most people don't get there because most people don't have the time to read news all day. And so they wind up being either influenced by that sort of primary thing that they see, that primary opinion given to them, or they just give up altogether and they resign from having an opinion and say, you know what, I don't know anything about the subject. I don't really know what's going on. And then it's even more dangerous. They either have no opinion, although they have had exposure to the topic, or they have the first opinion that they've encountered, or the one that's been most kind of sensationalized and compelling. And in some small minority of cases, people have gone through everything. Now they have an opinion, but they wasted 3 hours a day.
Yeah, and I think maybe one of the reason why there was this limit on how young you can be before you can vote there was this idea that, well, you had to have a certain degree of being informed about the world in order to be capable of making a good decision. The world has gotten far more complicated. That age has not changed. Sometimes I wonder if that shouldn't be moved into the maybe mid 30s, maybe even a little later, because it's extraordinarily difficult. And like you say, that most of us don't have the time to sit and, well, one of the great things about the internet is that if you have a job where you don't have to be thinking about everything all the time, and there's some sort of task that you're performing, you can listen to something. And if you want to listen to something of some value, you can learn an awful lot. And that was actually one of the things that um, uh, that's one of the things that I implemented in my own life. So I started doing jobs that did not involve me having to think about everything I was doing all the time. And that gave me an opportunity to listen to a lot of things. And that's a wonderful opportunity. It does require a lot of sifting through. You have to be very critical. It's not an easy process. But I think that even if you don't have that opportunity and you're someone who maybe on the weekends will try to get a sense of what's going on in the world, over the course of the years, you'll start to see patterns, So it seems like the most vulnerable people are the ones who either never got engaged or committed to themselves to some kind of ideological perspective early on in life, and they're kind of invested in it, or the young, people who are kind of new to it and have not yet gotten their feet wet in understanding all the various kind of games that are being played when they're being presented with information.
Yeah.
I still think that we will run into difficulty when it comes to really confirming some of this base information. That there are still things that when you strip away all of the interpretation, what are the precise facts? So, one of the things that comes to mind is the Syrian gas attack, right? Now, how do we characterize the facts of that incident? That's a question. I mean, it's, I think, an extremely important one. One that people don't think about that often anymore it kind of got folded into the narrative of what was happening at the time. There was a certain interpretation of those events, but those events have been brought into question, or at least the agents behind those events. So, I'm not saying that I know which way it went, what actually happened, but when it comes to base level events, there are some problems. There's problems really understanding what precisely happened.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think when we take it in that realm of like, there's obviously issues and challenges with almost every part of information transference, whether that's of the most essential things or as you start layering all the paint, obviously that multiplies. But I wouldn't say we are at such a there's real opportunity to just do better in terms of stripping information down to its essentials now, barring those kind of outlier examples where there is such inconsistency on what are the base facts. Like that problem is sort of not going away. It's a separate problem from the one that we are capable of solving, perhaps. But even on the issues that surround our society much more, you know, presently and much more in front of our face, like the big issues of the day, from the tariffs to the bills to the Supreme Court decisions, these are issues that have fact basis to them that don't require us to send investigative journalists to Syria. And I think just isolating on those commonplace, everyday important issues, there is a huge opportunity. And that's the opportunity that we are taking. I'm not prepared to say that we have an answer on how to deal with the ambiguities of situations where the issue has no agreed upon fact base whatsoever. The way we've been dealing it so far, and informed as we actually would not surface it, meaning that if we don't know something, we won't talk about it. We only talk about issues where there is a certainty around reporting on them, right? As we know enough to say that there's a common fact base, and what we can present, we can attest is accurate. And so that leads us at this current time to actually not talk about some things that we just don't know enough about. And we're okay with that because we've never aimed to be breaking news or real-time news by any way. We are timely news, that's for sure, but we only talk about things that are more or less confirmed. So in the instance that you bring up of an event where you don't really know what the reporting truth is, that usually wouldn't show up with us. If you are interested in that sort of topic, there are probably better places that do more speculative, maybe more investigative type of work. But we wouldn't touch that until it becomes crystallized fact base, at which point we will feel comfortable saying to our readers, it's ready for you to hear about this. And the big sacrifice is timing. We are, as a result of that, a little bit delayed on some issues. We mostly focus on issues that are so in front of people that there is a common fact base already, like from this morning's text, the previous morning text. But I hear what you're saying. There are some questions or some unanswered sort of questions in the industry that there are no easy answers for. And we don't claim to have those answers either, at least not yet.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting strategy. Unfortunately, sometimes some of the biggest stories are, have questionable fact bases right at the center of them. So when it comes to kind of being informed as to what's presently a big moving issue. So for instance, was the attack on Iran an actual major hit to Iran's nuclear infrastructure? Seems like we don't know, right? And yet, so some of these stories are incredibly important, uh, you could just reduce it to, well, there was an attack.
That's what we do. That's
Yeah.
exactly how we kind of deal with this ambiguity. If we don't know, right? Iran is saying one thing, UN is saying another thing. The watchdog whatever PPE, the atomic,
IAEA.
yeah. The
Yeah.
atomic watchdog is saying another thing. The US obviously is claiming all kinds of stories. In that environment where we don't know, we would either say nothing about the impacts, like we just don't know. Like we know that this has happened. Here's the detail we do know. We do not know beyond that. Occasionally, if we have the opportunity, we would mention what are the people saying. You would say, okay, Trump claims a complete obliteration. EAP confirms. Iran denies, saying it will take months to restore enrichment. And so we would say maybe the level of that, where we aren't, again, picking sides in terms of the evidence that we choose, but we are giving the valuable and the important components, again, for you as the end reader to be able to make up your own opinion. Because that, in the end of the day, is what we're trying to do. We're trying to give you the building blocks for your own opinion.
So here's a question for you. So, quite often, if you're a headline reader, right, you will have missed some extraordinarily important detail within the body of the story that really flushes out what's actually going on or provides an insight that you wouldn't otherwise get. Now, part of the reason why that's the case is that headlines are quite often extraordinarily misleading. They have the most paint on them, right? Uh, but how do you kind of encourage people to have a nuanced way of thinking when you're providing them such small pieces of information to summarize a story? Like, what's the way of encouraging that level of critical thought when it comes to stories?
I think it goes back to what I mentioned around we don't do everything, and we don't attempt to kind of be an end-to-end critical thinking solution. We provide one component of that, which we think is the most fundamental, which is like you're exposed to the information that will be the building block of your opinion, and we don't give you the chisel, right? It's almost like we give you the raw material. I think that's probably the right analogy here. Is we give you the raw material, and none of the fat around it. So none of the junk. We'll give you the raw material without the junk.
So you're kind of getting what a journalist would get, in essence,
in some ways,
like a summary of what the journalists would get.
Yeah, I would say you get the talking points at a level of the journalism world where they are no BS and they are very sort of like to the point, and they have the figures and the details and the data points that someone who's very rigorous in their thinking would care about. So we give you that as raw material. We leave none of the junk in so that you don't have to do that filtering yourself. But we don't, in our minimalism as a solution, also give you the chisel, also give you the training of how to mine and how to extract that. So we leave that to the reader, and the readers we serve generally are yearning for the raw material, and they don't need training on how to encourage their own critical thinking. That's sort of not our role to play. We hope that universities, we hope that trade schools, we hope that industry and just professional experience and personal experience would equip people with that level of behavior. But we don't find that that's missing. Like, people know how to kind of find truth from fiction, or at least we operate on the assumption that they're able to, should they want to. We give them the missing piece, which is there is no raw material out there. Everything is an already shaped statue. And you have to take that form and say, well, I don't know if I agree with this form. And so we were sort of the provider of I would say it's one, the actual raw material, which is no one else provides that. We're sort of unique in our category. And two is it's the taste making of what is raw material, like what is factual, what is important, and what is pure. So that even if you come in, say you're a student, we have some students in our network where they're young and maybe they haven't been able to vote yet, to your earlier kind of threshold of intellectual maturity and political and civil maturity. And they come in and they start using our product. And over time, we've heard this firsthand from them. They actually develop a sense of what is a fact base and what is valuable to know, and when is the point at which it becomes commentary, because they're able to take our work and say, okay, well, this is what informed looks like, and then they look at Fox News or CNBC or whatever it is that you are looking at, and they realize, okay, well, this is what a finished statue that is showing me a certain form and is telling me this is a perspective. This is a huge difference. So in some ways, I think there is a little bit of training and encouragement going on, because we're showing them a model of what is pure. And it's easy to contrast with what is unpure, which is the rest of society's news commentary.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and a real service to the world. It seems that it's been increasingly difficult to find something within the mainstream media that gets anywhere near something like that. It used to be that for a while, PBS was sort of like that, perhaps 25, 30 years ago, I don't know. And C-SPAN for a while. I think maybe C-SPAN is still, I just lost your video, by the way.
Yeah, I'm having some connection issues.
Okay, no problem. I think C-SPAN maybe still has that kind of unfiltered presentation of data. I don't have cable TV anymore, so I don't know. I can't speak to that directly, but it takes an incredible amount of time to absorb that. So having it in a summary form is incredibly useful. I think the talking points term is probably something more appropriate to the propaganda outlets like Fox News, CNBC, CNN, what have you, because in essence, they're kind of telling people what to think. And that's kind of what a talking point is. It's like, oh, you're going to talk this thing that I'm saying, right? It's basically trying to get people to just repeat the thing that they're hearing. And that brings into question the thing which you said earlier about that people do have this capacity to discern, to understand for themselves. I mean, obviously some do, but I've been wondering the extent to which that is a fundamental human trait at this point. I really don't know. I think some people just don't care. We kind of talked about this last time a bit. And maybe the people who don't care could discern if they were convinced to care about something. But maybe there are some people who just simply don't have the capacity to really make a discernment on what it is that they're hearing. I just don't know. I can't. Maybe there are psychologists who have studied this type of thing, but my sense is that the capacity to discern is something which has been perhaps intentionally damaged in human beings, and that part of that is because we are such a mediated species. There's a kind of dilemma. Like basically, we use media in order to inform ourselves, but it is a layer. It's a layer of mediation. And so that means we're not really having that direct experience. And that means that in some way or another, there is a potential for a variety of operations to occur at that mediation level. That's pretty much what propaganda is, right? So we're trying to filter out the noise in that media layer, but it's still a media layer. you know and without getting too far down the rabbit hole, and we are running out of time, 5 minutes and 30 seconds, unless we want to do a second session. I don't know what your schedule is like, but even if we did have immediate exposure to a given circumstance, there are problems with being able to discern precisely what it is that's happening. So for example, going back to that gas attack, someone who was on the ground at that moment may be no better suited to discern what precisely happened there than any of us were, right? So when it comes to information gathering, if we're going to be strict philosophically speaking, there are a variety of, let's say, weak spots in the chain in trying to understand precisely. What I love about what you're saying is that you're paring it down to the point where people are starting to be able to discern the difference between what hard data looks like and what interpretation is, what bias is, what propaganda is. Uh, but I think that we have to be careful to think that this thing is pure just on the basis of those efforts, because there are so many issues when it comes to the gathering of information, particularly nowadays where it's so easy to manipulate information, that there are, if we're going to really treat this philosophically, which is the unfortunate tendency that I have to do with just about everything that passes my path, then there are a set of issues that we cannot avoid, right? And they're not easily resolved. They're not easily resolved. I think that on a fundamental level, the humility about what it is that we think is going on is always the best stance, because it's extraordinarily difficult to really know with certainty, you know? So with that, let me give you the last 3.5 minutes, unless you would like to continue on further today.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to take these last couple of minutes and maybe just, I don't know if you have a pointed question, but I would love to maybe talk freely about what Informed has been doing, and sort of how we try to solve this problem of information overload and misinformation that is so rampant in society. But I want to
So
make
one
sure,
one
yeah,
thing, just like it's usually disseminated as a text message. Is that correct?
that's right. So one of the ways that we try to sort of be different is we try to, I would put it this way. There is very few media out there in like current, North American culture that respects your attention, that respects your time. Actually, every single media I'm aware of is doing the opposite. They're trying to clickbait you and sort of hijack your attention, and they try to hold you there for as long as possible, trying to hold your attention hostage. And so we call this combination of things in maybe a bit of a silly way, but a bit of serious way, attention terrorism. And when you think of, right, when
Yeah.
you think of social media has been built on attention terrorism. You kind of, maybe you want to be entertained, but you don't want it to consume your entire life. But when you look at most people that are users of TikTok, of Instagram, of any sort of social media, of Twitter, they are completely sort of consumed because the platform is encouraging engagement, encouraging you to stay. We actually see the same behavior, even predates social media, in the news media, obviously entertainment media as well,
Yeah.
which is constant solicitation of like, wait, before you go, read this other article. Before you go, play this crossword, this puzzle, this game,
Well, and we have the term news junkie, which, suggests a problem,
yeah,
right?
a
Like
news
a
junk.
junkie, I've kind of thought of myself as a news junkie for much of my life. I know some people are worse than me, but yeah, I have spent a lot of time absorbing information. I am grateful for it. I also recognize that it's been deleterious in certain ways, and I think that at this point in my life, I've kind of absorbed enough. I quite often feel like, oh, I know what the story is before I've even heard it,
Yeah,
which is a
yeah,
terrible presumption to make, by the way.
I
But
would agree. Um, but yeah, so we live in that sort of media environment that encourages engagement, and I would say it enforces engagement. It forces you to constantly be paying attention. And one of the ways that we decided, and it was important to us to, we wanted to give the attention back to the user, and we wanted to safeguard it and protect it from ever being sort of violated like that again. And so we do that specifically in the news realm, because doing that in social media and entertainment media seems near impossible, because in some ways you are already consenting to being hijacked when you're going into into entertainment media spaces. When you go into news, in the news media world, most people don't go there to spend hours there. They don't go there to be misled. Don't go there to be polarized. It happens to be an effect, and I think news junkie is an invention of the news industry more than is of the individual.
okay,
And so to to protect our readers' attention, we've chosen to do the opposite of what every other news media company does or social media news do, which is not optimized for engagement, not optimized for terrorizing the person's attention. And one channel that we found, and we thought a lot about this, that would be the most sort of attention respectful, but also, if you're going to read informed, you're going to actually pay attention to informed, because we don't want to be another subscription that you don't open or another subscription that you are not looking forward to receiving. So what we found is that through email, it's a very crowded place, and it's been very spammy, very overcrowded, I would say, over the last few years, and I would say the last decade, we just kind of lost email as we knew it. Most folks are on their phone, and no one's really enjoying being on a website as much anymore. So web-based experiences are also declining very quickly. And the channel that both commands attention and is in its nature very respectful of users' attention is actually text SMS. Because on one hand, it is very easy to stop it from happening. We operate a toll-free number. It's one of the most regulated parts of our society. And if at some point you are tired, if you want to stop, you don't need to remember a password. You don't need to log in. You don't need to verify that you're a human. You don't need to go through any of those roadblocks. You just press the word or type the word stop. And it's permanent, and you cannot, you will be protected from any sort of solicitation or spamming. And so it's a very strict channel. The other element is privacy protection. We want to make sure that our users are not being targeted, not being, their data is not being in any way harvested for any sort of purposes, which we would never do. But we don't even want to operate a channel that would allow us to do that in the first place. So there's a great and absolute commitment to user privacy and no data sort of harvesting, which SMS allows for. SMS is a highly simplified and non-trackable format where, we really don't know anything about our users except for what they choose to tell us. So we have.
So you actually don't even have the phone numbers?
We have the phone numbers, but we don't have anything beyond the phone numbers unless they choose to share that with us. So there is no engagement tracking. We don't know if they read or not read. We don't follow the, so to speak, their exact behavior. How with cookies online and with website tracking, there's a lot of nefarious tracking of what users do before and after they go to a website. There's a lot of kind of like user journeys that get created. Yeah. We don't know anything, and we don't want to. It's your privacy, it's your life to choose. We just want to be a provider to you in this responsible way. And so for those reasons and some others, we've chosen SMS as the format where it's super minimalist by default, where we aren't even able to send you any sort of rich media with a lot of other, sensationalized moving around objects. That's not really what we do. It's super confined. Our texts are always within a very small size because we always want to do one text at most per day. And it's limited in size. It's only about 1,500 characters. And so we self-impose that limit on ourselves, but we like that because that's the extent of importance. Like, not everything is important. And because we text every day, we actually get a pretty solid coverage over a course of a couple of days. But we don't ever feel the need to bombard you with blogs, with content, with scrolling feeds, none of that stuff. And so the choice of SMS, per your question, was a choice of user privacy that is absolute, that is not able to be violated. It's a choice of minimalism that is self-imposed, but is also absolute. It's also a choice of engagement in some ways, because while we don't optimize for users to engage with us in any way, we want to take up the least amount of headspace on their side. It is the only channel where people are still paying attention, that has not been corrupted by spam like the way email has, and by changing user behavior and preferences the way websites have. And so that's been the choice of SMS.
I love it. I think it's really great. It's also probably more robust because I think it would be very difficult to do like a DOS attack on on an SMS, right?
Exactly. It's
So here's a question though. One of the things that people who really love information want to be able to do is to have an archive that they can search. Is there any way of doing that with informed daily briefings?
we actually are once you are sort of in register, once you are enrolled in the informed world, you sort of get the archive directly into your phone, and you're able to search through that either through your messages search, or even if you are using a Mac, for example, and you want to go on the computer, you're able to access the same information history there, and probably on other devices as well. So there is a natural archive that emerges once you are subscribed. And while we have the capacity to show you the whole historic record, we kind of choose not to because there is a sort of incentive. We want to give something special to users that have been with us for longer. They have just a longer archive naturally because they've been with us, and we haven't actually thought of showing our archival records to new users. It's sort of you build your own archive as you go. But it is registered. It's not something that's ephemeral. It's something that you have access to at any point through your messages or through your computer. The duration of your subscription and your membership with Informed naturally yields itself to, you have an archive of your time with us.
That's interesting. So yeah, what else would you like to say about informed or any way in which informed is solving some of the pervasive and I think extremely urgent problems happening in the media landscape?
Totally. I would just maybe highlight a couple more things, and it's that we do everything different from the way the traditional legacy news media does. We never have advertisement, and we never will. That's the core of kind of why we exist, because advertisement and solicitation frustrates us profoundly. In the process of reading news, you shouldn't have to be bombarded with buy this car or buy these socks or buy this house or get this mortgage. It's extremely sort of nefarious positioning to be reading news that is meant to inform you and being influenced alongside it to make certain decisions. And we would never have that. We never, the reason we exist is to avoid that for our readers. So there's no level of solicitation of advertisement, of any sort of sponsorships. We refuse any advertiser or sponsor revenue. And we even refuse investors because there are other incentives that they would be optimizing for that we're not comfortable sort of sacrificing our readers' interest. And so in some ways, we're the only company out there that is refusing revenue to prioritize our mission, which is all about prioritizing the user. So there's no advertisers that we optimize for in the way that everybody else does. There are no big sponsors that are influencing our coverage either. And there are even no investors on purpose that would influence certain profiteering, certain revenue targets and incentives that would undermine the interest of our reader. So we're very absolutist in that sense of prioritizing the reader. We do it through SMS. And to kind of sum up what Informed does, is we text an executive news briefing to busy people every morning, every weekday morning. And in that briefing, we give you the building blocks of forming your own opinion on the world across the world of economics, politics, business, culture, just as the human condition evolves. And we do so in a way that doesn't force you to pick a side, but allows you to form your own opinion in a non-imposed way. And that's
Can I just bring the terminology of forming one's opinion into question a little bit? Like
Please.
whether or not that should be the ultimate goal of consumption of information. I mean, I guess, opinion is a slightly tricky word because it kind of suggests that you have a position on something. What's your opinion on this? What's your opinion on that? As if it were necessary to have an opinion on everything.
Sure.
Not sure that, you could take a neutral position, which one would probably not call an opinion. So maybe there's, I think that since you're being such a purist, I'm going to be as purist with you on the language side of things and suggest, maybe maybe there's another way of thinking about what is the goal of consuming information, where we're not just trying to like have talking points, we're not just trying to be well informed at the cocktail party, or even to like make some kind of a determination in the business world, but really fundamentally more rather to try to understand what's happening. I think understanding is really what we're trying to get.
I would
That's
agree. Yeah, I would agree. And I think we have such a variety of users from the political spectrum, from the income spectrum, from the where they're based geographic spectrum, that I think folks get different things out of our work, vastly different things. Some get it that they're the smartest person in the room in a business setting, in a boardroom. Some people get it that they're the smartest person at a cocktail party. But I think even more fundamentally, as you put it, it's a level of awareness about the world. It's a level of appeasing your global curiosity without influencing it in a certain direction, without kind of being pushed to always have an opinion, right? Is I think I maybe misspoke that we don't force you to have an opinion. You don't need to have an opinion. We give you the building blocks to be aware for your awareness.
yeah. I don't think you misspoke at all. I just think it's kind of a fine point, but I think it's one worth making because there is a lot of pressure for people to join with, usually the left or the right, but there's plenty of other groups now. Everything is sort of divided in these different kind of antagonistic groups. And quite often the information is being presented in such a way as to suggest that you should be usually against one group or another. That's usually how they get you to join one side, right? It's like, just look at how horrible these people are. Oh, you better join this side. That's how every election is won, right?
Totally.
Those people are the worst. Yeah, our group isn't that great, but those people are the worst. So I think that we have to reframe what we're really trying to do when we're absorbing information, because quite often that's the default setting is to pick sides, and that's not serving us, right?
I would
So
agree. And so I would say the forming of an opinion is an outcome that is accessible now through informed, but it isn't a required outcome in any way. And so it's like awareness, it's understanding of the world around you and the life that your life will likely change because of certain developments, whether that's a big, beautiful bill or the Supreme Court ruling or a flood in large parts of Texas. And so it's about being aware of the world. It's about being informed as to how your life might change as a result of it. And it's about, if you would like to have an opinion on things, here is the building blocks of forming that, should you choose to have an opinion on a subject.
okay, let me put you on the spot then, all right?
Yeah.
So what's your opinion of the big beautiful bill?
Well, I don't want to get into like the details of
But you have to understand that certainly is, I mean, okay, we could say, what are the facts about the big beautiful bill? And then what is the significance of it?
Yeah, and that's exactly what an informed briefing would cover and covers on a daily basis. And so it allows a person, whatever they believe about the beautiful bill, whatever their preconceptions are, and whatever opinion they want to have, it gives you the essential impacts.
So
And
you wouldn't want to put your own opinion out probably as someone who's providing this service, because that would in some way or another taint the service itself.
I mean, I would say yes. I'm not particularly interested in sort of getting to the details of a political conversation and like my own opinion on things, because I wanted to sort of really focus this conversation on informed as a mechanism and as a concept. But we can have a separate conversation that's much more political, and we can maybe have a little debate and explore. Maybe we agree on most things.
I think that we agree on a lot of things, and I suspect that we may have some significant disagreements as well. But I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, but maybe we keep that for another conversation.
That's fine.
And,
Yeah.
and I just wanted to sort of highlight that's what informs uses, and that's kind of how it helps folks. And maybe the last thing I'll say is just if there are folks among listeners that are interested in seeing what informed does and how it works, anyone who is listening to this show entitled to a free trial. So there is no risk of any sort of, testing something or, not being satisfied with it. You can go through a free trial and see if Informed can be helpful to you. And so I'll ask you, Noah, to include a little link to our website, and so folks can check out how it works.
Yep, I will do that.
But
And
our website is literally informed.now. And so it's a very simple website to get to. And for any listeners of this show, there's an even faster way to get to us. And that is simply by texting the word assembly to our toll-free number. And that's 844-406-INFO, which is the same thing as 844-406-4636. So any friends of Noah and the show are going to be fast forwarded to the front of the line to see what we do. And obviously also you have a free trial to see if this is something that is helpful to you, and if Informed is something you want to have in your life. And so super grateful, Noah, for you having me on, and the ability to talk about this mission that we are pushing forward. And we'll be happy to reconnect again in some time. But thank you for having me on the show, and for your patience as we uncovered all these different aspects of what Informed is and what we stand for.
great. Well, I'm really glad that you came back on, Kira. I'm looking forward to being a subscriber to your Informed service. And I hope we'll have the opportunity to talk about this or anything else at some point again in the future. We'll stay in touch.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Great. All right. Have a beautiful rest of the day, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.